You season your food without thinking. A pinch here, a shake there. It costs you almost nothing. You can buy a year's supply for less than the price of a sandwich. But for most of human history, that small white crystal was worth more than gold. And people died trying to get it. Strange, right? Something you barely noticed today once decided who lived and who didn't. Let that sink in for a second. Your body cannot make salt on its own. It cannot store much of it either. And yet, without it, your nerves stop firing properly. Your muscles stop contracting the way they need to. Your blood stops moving correctly through your veins. You would die, slowly, painfully, and not very long after you ran out. So your ancestors did something extraordinary. They walked, not a few miles, sometimes thousands of them, across deserts with no shade, across mountains with no trail, across land with no roads, no maps, no guarantee they would ever come back alive. Why would anyone risk that for a mineral you can buy in bulk at any grocery store today? Because the alternative was worse, much worse. Think about where you live right now. Unless you're near the ocean, salt is not naturally abundant in your environment. It hides in deep deposits underground, in dried lake beds baked by centuries of sun, in seawater that has to be evaporated drop by painstaking drop under the right weather, at the right time of year. Early humans living inland had almost no local source they could rely on. Researchers studying ancient trade patterns, including archaeologist Andrew Sherratt, have traced salt routes stretching across entire continents, some of them older than written language itself. Before there were words for civilization, there were paths worn into the earth by feet chasing salt. Here is the part that should stop you. Before agriculture, hunter-gatherers got most of their salt from meat. Animal blood and tissue contain sodium naturally, in quantities that meet the body's needs without any extra effort. You didn't need to add salt to your food because your food already had it built in. But the moment humans began farming, the moment they started eating grains and vegetables instead of meat-heavy diets, something fundamental changed. Plant foods are low in sodium, painfully low. Suddenly, an entire population that used to get salt for free, embedded quietly in their meals, now needed to go find it on purpose. This is the quiet engine behind something massive. Agriculture didn't just change what people ate. It changed what people needed to survive. And what people needed shaped where they built roads, where they founded cities, and who they were willing to trade with or fight to the death over. Look at it from above, the way historians do when they map old trade networks across the ancient world. Salt routes connected West Africa to the Mediterranean coast. They cut directly through the Alps, carved into mountain passes still used by hikers today who have no idea what once moved through them. They threaded along the Yangtze River in ancient China, feeding markets hundreds of miles from any coastline. Caravans of hundreds of camels crossed the Sahara Desert, carrying nothing but slabs of salt. Because on the other side, in cities like Timbuktu, that salt could be traded for its weight in gold. Not metaphorically, literally, pound for pound. In some recorded transactions documented by historians studying medieval trans-Saharan trade. Why would gold, something humans can't eat, drink, or use to survive a single day, be worth the same as something your body cannot function without? Because scarcity creates value, and value creates power. Whoever controlled salt controlled survival itself, and that meant controlling everyone around them too. An entire kingdom could rise or fall depending on whether it sat near a salt deposit or 300 miles away from the nearest one. This is where the story gets darker and more familiar than you might expect. Roman soldiers were partly paid using salt as part of their compensation. The word salary comes directly from sal, the Latin word for salt. Some historians debate the precise details, whether soldiers were paid in salt itself or simply given money earmarked specifically to buy it. But either way, the connection runs deep enough that an entire system of human labor still echoes it today, 2,000 years later. Every time you get paid for a job, every time you check your bank account after a long week, you're using a word born from a substance your ancestors might have killed or died to defend. In China, salt was so valuable that for centuries it was taxed directly by the imperial state, sometimes generating a huge percentage of total government revenue, more than almost any other single resource. Historian S.A.M. Adshead who studied the global history of salt extensively, documented how Chinese emperors built entire bureaucracies, complete with inspectors, checkpoints, and armed guards, just to control its production and trade across the empire. Control salt, and you control the people who need it to live. It's that simple, and that brutal, and it worked for centuries. In parts of West Africa, salt bars were used as actual currency. Not symbolically, the way we might say, time is money. Real currency, traded hand to hand the exact same way coins or paper bills are traded today. A trader could buy land with salt, pay off a debt with salt. Some historical accounts describe disputes turning violent over salt deposits, armed conflicts breaking out between groups who both needed access to the same dwindling source. The same way modern conflicts erupt over oil fields buried beneath contested borders. Different substance entirely, same human instinct underneath it. Here's the question worth sitting with for a moment. What does it say about a species that wars were fought, fortunes were built, and trade routes spanning entire continents were carved permanently into existence, all chasing something this small? Something you can hold a spoonful of in your palm without thinking twice, without even noticing its weight? It says something about scarcity itself, about how the human brain doesn't measure value by how much something matters in some abstract, objective sense. It measures value by how hard something is to get, and how badly you would suffer without it. Gold is beautiful, but you can't eat it. Salt is plain, almost boring to look at, but it keeps your heart beating correctly. Your ancestors understood that distinction in their bones, even if they never could have explained the chemistry behind it. That instinct hasn't gone anywhere. You don't walk 1,000 miles for salt anymore. You don't risk your life crossing a desert for a mineral your body needs to function, but you'll notice the exact same pattern wherever something feels artificially scarce today. Limited drops on a sneaker release, sold-out concert tickets disappearing in minutes. The quiet fear of missing out on something everyone else around you seems to already have. Your brain still runs the same ancient calculation your ancestors ran out there in the desert heat. Scarce plus necessary equals valuable, even when the actual necessity has quietly disappeared from the equation entirely. Psychologists studying scarcity, including influential work by Sendil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir, have shown that when people perceive something as scarce, their decision-making narrows sharply. They focus intensely, almost obsessively, on acquiring it, sometimes at the cost of everything else happening in their life at that moment. That tunnel vision kept your ancestors alive when salt genuinely meant the difference between surviving the season and not. The same tunnel vision today can quietly push you to chase things that don't actually keep you alive at all. Things that just feel like they might. So picture it again, slowly this time. Picture a caravan crossing open desert at dawn, camels loaded down under heavy slabs, men walking for weeks on end with nothing but the promise of trade waiting somewhere on the other side of the sand. They weren't irrational. They weren't exaggerating the value of a simple mineral out of superstition or habit. They were responding accurately and rationally to a world where this one unremarkable substance stood directly between them and a slow, certain death. Consider, too, what happened to entire civilizations built around this single need. The city of Salzburg in modern Austria takes its very name from salt, Salz, because the wealth that built its cathedrals and palaces came from nearby salt mines that had been worked for thousands of years before any tourist ever photographed them. Venice, one of history's great trading powers, built part of its early fortune on salt monopolies controlling access across the northern Mediterranean. These weren't side notes in history. They were load-bearing pillars holding up entire economies, entire dynasties, entire ways of life that depended on something most people today wouldn't think twice about pouring straight down the drain. There's one more layer to this story, and it might be the darkest one. Because once something becomes valuable enough, someone always finds a way to control it through force rather than trade. Colonial powers understood this perfectly. When the British controlled India, they imposed a salt tax so severe that it became one of the most hated symbols of foreign rule. Indians weren't even allowed to freely collect salt that washed up naturally along their own coastline. Mahatma Gandhi knew exactly what he was doing in 1930 when he led the Salt March, walking nearly 240 miles to the sea simply to make salt with his own hands in open defiance of the law. He didn't choose salt by accident. He chose it because everyone understood, instantly, viscerally, what it meant to be denied something your body cannot survive without. No speech could have explained injustice as clearly as that single act did. Think about that for a moment. A substance so fundamental to survival that controlling it became a tool of empire, and reclaiming it became an act of revolution. That's not a minor historical footnote. That's a multi-century thread running directly from prehistoric trade routes to 20th century independence movements, all tied to the exact same small white crystals sitting in your kitchen cabinet right now. You inherited their brain. The exact wiring that made salt worth a life-threatening journey across hostile terrain, worth empires rising and falling, worth marches and revolutions, is the same wiring sitting quietly behind your eyes right now, this very second, as you watch this. It just doesn't have salt to chase anymore. It has been repointed, almost accidentally, toward different targets. Status, attention. The next purchase that promises to feel scarce, exclusive, urgent, even when you know somewhere in the rational part of your mind that you don't actually need it to survive the winter. Maybe that's the real reframe hiding underneath this whole story. The crystal itself never really mattered, not in some cosmic sense. The hunger behind it did, and that hunger is still running, quietly, persistently, underneath nearly everything you want today, whether you've ever noticed it or not. You season your food without thinking, reaching for the shaker the way you might reach for a light switch, but somewhere in the deepest, oldest layers of your brain, built long before cities, before writing, before money as we know it existed, a part of you still remembers when that small white crystal meant the difference between living through the winter and not living at all.